Welcome, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here today. I'm Jamie. I am with Metro Council, and I'm just going to give you a little bit of information about Metro Council, and then I get the distinct pleasure of getting to introduce our incredible speaker today. So, as I said, I'm Jamie. I'm with Metro Council. Metro Council is a collaboration between all the community mental health centers in the Kansas City Metro, representing the 7 community mental health centers, along with Mental Health America of the Heartland and Center of Behavioral Medicine. And we collaborate on various initiatives and projects, really focusing on mental health awareness and education. So we're happy to be here today. And we have 3 webinars that happen on the 2nd and 4th Thursday of the month from noon to 1 p.m. You're here today. Thank you all so much for being here. And we also want to let you all know about our annual conference. So we have the Mental Health KC conference that we host and plan every year. This year, the dates are a little different and the location is different. So we have grown so much that we now have a new location. So it'll be May 23rd and 24th. That's a Thursday, Friday. We know that it is going to be Memorial Day weekend, but we promise you will be out before noon or by noon on that Friday. So you can then go and enjoy your weekend. And we are going to be having it at Johnson County Community College. We're really excited to be having it there. And we right now have a request for proposals in terms of speakers. So if you know of anyone who would be a great speaker for the conference, please fill out the proposal. If you yourself would be a great speaker, again, fill out that proposal. We're looking for speakers. And so we hope that all of you can at least attend the conference. This at Johnson County Community College, May 24th or 23rd and 24th. So save the date. So with that, I want to talk a little bit about our upcoming webinar today. So really excited to introduce Tamicka Monson with Tamicka Monson Counseling. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. She's going to be presenting today on instilling Black dignity. She's a professional counselor with Tamicka Monson Counseling. She holds a computer engineering degree and 2 master's degrees, including a master's degree in counseling psychology from University of Kansas. And she's very passionate about identity work through individual and group counseling, speaking and writing. She helps others heal, grow, and become the best versions of themselves. She's been a dedicated speaker for over 15 years. She uses her skills to reach out to hurting individuals within communities, discussing topics such as mental and emotional healing, including living a whole person after experiencing trauma. She also speaks to community leaders on topics surrounding social justice affecting minority communities. She has worked in the field of childcare, youth development, education, and mental health for more than 10 years. And she challenges educators to consider the unique struggles of those within suffering communities. So I'm really excited to introduce her today. Just a few quick little reminders. We are using webinar or Zoom webinar. And so that means that you can see Tamicka and you can see myself, but you cannot see each other. But you will be able to talk with each other and with us through chat and through Q&A. And then certificates of attendance will be available at the end of the webinar. I will put the link along with a code into the chat at the end of the webinar today. And then also just knowing quick little disclaimer, the views and opinions presented are those of the speaker, do not necessarily represent the opinions of Metro Council. So with that, I'm incredibly excited to introduce Tamicka.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tamicka Monson. Definitely excited to share with you all today. This will be a little different for me in that I can't see everybody's beautiful faces, but we'll make it work. But I'm definitely excited, so feel free to like we mentioned, like Jamie mentioned, drop information in the chat. I did see some cool emojis. Now they're floating thumbs, so that's pretty cool. So, like Jamie mentioned, I am a professional counselor. I work at Tamicka Monson Counseling, which is my own private practice. I'm also a contract therapist in a local school district. And as of October, I am a published author, so check out Where Daddy Lives. It's a book about children of incarcerated parents. You can check that out on Amazon or on my website to get a signed copy locally. Thank you. Thank you for that hand clap emoji. Um, where you can pick up a local copy of that book. And I think it's a great book that teaches kids about empathy, as well as just a resource if you work with children of incarcerated parents, if you work with any kind of child, to just teach them about empathy. It's not necessarily just for children of incarcerated parents, but it's a great resource to teach about coping skills of all kinds of children. It has a great resource in the back of the book, a resource letter to um, encourage people on how to talk with children of incarcerated parents. So I think it's a great story. It's gotten great reviews. So check it out. Anywho, so today I'll be talking about something that I'm very passionate about, not just because I am Black, but just because of what I've seen just in my work over the course of many, many years. And that's instilling Black dignity. So definitely excited to share about that today. So um, yeah, let's jump right into this. Okay, so instilling Black dignity. All right, so the first thing to understand about instilling Black dignity is this idea of inherited and racial trauma. And it's not going to be all doom and gloom because I really want to focus on how we can instill Black dignity. But in order to understand how we got here, a lot of times I hear, people say things like, why do we just, there's so many ways in which there is oppression. Why do we just focus on race? And it's because we haven't really ever really talked about race without tiptoeing and dancing around it, right? So when we talk about this idea of race and racial trauma, we need to understand the roots, right? So there's slavery, there's redlining and gentrification. And honestly, I'm from Chicago, so when I look at what's happening in Kansas City, it does kind of scare me because I see kind of similar things that are similar to what's happened in Chicago with gentrification and kind of property values increasing, people not being able to pay property and taxes, property taxes, this idea that, kind of to appease wealth guilt and white guilt, we've now created community gardens. And one of the things I've found out about some of the community gardens, not all of them, is that they're on tainted soil, and so they're not even being able to be used. And so there's systemic oppression that's happening, and people aren't alerted to that, right? So in Chicago, there was kind of this redlining and gentrification, in that we tore down housing projects, and we thought, okay, this is a great thing to do, right? But we just maneuvered all those people from the housing projects to the suburbs and built up the communities to be able to essentially make it for the wealthy, right? So that's essentially what's happening in Kansas City, slowly but surely, right? We're bringing in a lot of out of town people to build up the community that's pushing out the people who live in the community, and so that's happening right under our noses. So the war on drugs and mass incarceration, police brutality, poverty, discrepancies in racism and governmental policies, education, healthcare, mental health care, and education are still happening. So this isn't something that's, a thing of the past. This is something we are currently seeing. And so the reason why I have, the hierarchy of needs is because in order to understand the reason why some Black Americans are still in survival mode and why they're not able to focus on self-actualization and esteem is because they're still fighting for their basic needs. And so sometimes I hear things that are racist that are just, subtle racism. So it's like kind of like the Black people don't care about themselves, the poor people don't care about themselves, they don't take care of their communities. And it's, in order to understand, one time I went to a conference that I was speaking at, and one of the speakers mentioned, you're either a victim, griever, or survivor, right? And so this idea that people are just fighting to survive, if you think about neighborhood crime, things like that, we can't even get to the point where we're exercising mental health care, physical care, because we're just trying to survive. And so we saw a lot of this racism even during COVID, where it was like subtly the Black people and the brown people aren't taking care of themselves. They have pre-existing medical conditions, and that's why they're dying at alarming rates. So basically, you're on your own, right? Again, the hierarchy of needs says, I'm just trying to survive day to day, right? So I can't even focus on the other parts of the hierarchy, right? Because I'm trying to survive day to day. And that's not everybody. That's why I say some, but a lot of people in the Black community and in impoverished communities are. So that's where we are starting from. So if you Google the Personal Bill of Rights, the author is unknown, so I do not take credit for this at all. You will see that there are about 26 Personal Bill of Rights. And I think that this is powerful. When I do work, a lot of my work is in working with people with trauma. So I think this is just important to understand conceptualizing our basic human needs. And so a lot of times people with trauma don't understand that they have basic human needs. And so I will pull out the Personal Bill of Rights and talk with them like you have the right to your own need for personal space and time. And for them to see it and say, oh, I do, right? It's not just like something that, it's not a luxury. You have the right for those things. So what I did was I said, what are some things that all kids should have the right to? The all 26, but one of them is like the right to a fulfilling sex life. So we don't want to go into that for kids. And then I thought they're not going to remember all 25 of those. So I thought 12 of those would be good to at least teach kids. So since the focus is on Black children in particular, what I'm going to talk about is how do we instill Black dignity in children, Black children. So we're going to talk about that. All right, so the first one is to make mistakes and not have to be perfect. So there's a fine line between allowing kids to not be perfect and make mistakes and enabling them. So when it comes to Black children in particular and parents of Black children, the line is even finer because you have to teach your child that they have the right to not be perfect, and you have to walk the line, and you get to make mistakes, and the society is still seeing you in ways in which you don't have the right to make mistakes. And so it's like you have to allow them some grace and know that society is not going to have grace on them, which sucks, and it shouldn't be like that. So I want to show you a quick clip. If you are a Blackish fan, you will like this. And everybody see my video? All right.
Hi, sweetheart. Look at that nice truck. Vroom, vroom, vroom. So, honey, I wanted to talk to you about how crazy Daddy was yesterday. He was so crazy, right? Talking about all that lotion stuff.
Actually, before I continue, I want to give a preface to this. So in the clip, right before the clip, there's this in the Black community, presentation matters. So before the clip, Andre, the dad, is he goes crazy on the son, and crazy just means like he's talking to his son about you can't leave the house without putting on lotion, because the son walks out and he's like very, very ashy on his knees, and he's like, we don't leave the house like this. So that's why mom is saying this.
My God, I wish I could say he's gonna be better, but we both know he's not. So, honey, I just want to make sure you know that there's nothing wrong with your skin. You're so strong and so handsome. And wait a minute. Okay, the podcast said do not focus on beauty or he is going to become an egomaniac. I got this. Devante, you are so smart. Coop said. compliments are the new smoking. Okay, honey, I just want you to understand that you are my special little boy, but not so special or so handsome or so smart that you're gonna become a sociopath. So, do you understand? Oh my God, no, oh God, oh no, no, okay, no, please don't cry, please don't cry. Okay, it's okay, sweetheart, it's fine. Listen, come here, vroom, vroom, look at this truck. This is my favorite truck. Vroom, vroom. Do you want ice cream for dinner, honey?
So basically, it's hitting on this idea, in psychology, sometimes we can focus on how we shouldn't give compliments. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later. We shouldn't give compliments to kids, especially if we're complimenting them on physical features, things like that, or even on features on, intelligence, things like that, because it will turn them XYZ, right? And so she's kind of doing this internal battle that's supposed to be, um, you know, funny in nature, but making a great point in that, there's that fine line to walk between parents. So yeah, the right to follow my own standards and values. So a Black kid, even in a white family, is not a white kid. So many times, Black kids who grow up in predominantly white spaces, schools, families, etc., feel like they don't fit in with Black or white families. So a great example of this is if you've ever seen the series Colin in Black and White. Colin goes through this kind of racial identity crisis in which he's, starts to kind of transform. He wants to get his hair done like a Black kid, right? For him, right? And so he starts wearing braids, and at one point, his parents are going along with it. Okay, you can get it done once. Well, we'll be okay with that. That's cool. And then eventually, mom is like, "You look like a thug," and that just kind of breaks him. And so he starts kind of going through depression because he's battling between worlds. He's, trying to fit in with his Black peers, his white family, and he's feeling disconnected. So even in, um, for Black kids in predominantly Black spaces, we hear this where they're struggling, and no matter what space they're in, whether they're in Black spaces or white spaces, because we're not all monolithic, they're struggling to fit in. So the right to follow their own standards and values. If they like anime, if they like, to be, I mean, I've always been told that I'm a nerd because I like neuroscience and things like that. But I also, like writing rap songs, things like that. So it's just funny that we think that Black people are monolithic. But I have five brothers. One of my brothers was always told that he speaks like a white boy. So there's just things that are being forced onto kids, Black kids, that this shouldn't be. I'm gonna pop in the chat. Hurricane Katrina comes to mind. I'm from Louisiana. Okay. All right. To express all of my feelings, both positive and negative, in a manner that will not harm others. Yes. So this is where I see a major discrepancy. And in my generation, it was stop all the crying, right? But I still see, I can think of in the last year, hearing the last school year, hearing things like, you're too old to be crying like this. And I'm thinking in certain spaces, right? You're too old to cry like this, or, things that we're not allowing Black kids to express themselves emotionally. So they're suppressing, right? And not able to express themselves in either way, right? If they're, showing happiness, it's seen as non-compliance, or they must be up to something. If like they're giddy, right? Oh, there's a group of giddy Black kids. It's not even necessarily that it's a anger or, some quote unquote negative emotion, but maybe they're just giddy and in the corner with their friends, and it's like, oh, let's go check on them, right? So being able to express themselves and cultivate that joy is seen as, let's just go over there and make sure they're not up to something, right? So being able to express all of our feelings, both negative and positive, in a manner that won't harm others is important. And across the board, I see this language, and I have to remind children and adults that no emotion, which is why I say in quotations, is positive or negative. It's neutral. For the sake of like documentation, and sometimes when I'm explaining emotions, I will say negative or positive, but I always give the disclaimer. Emotions are neutral. We add color for, no pun intended, to emotions, but emotions are neutral. And it's very important when we're talking about emotions that we're not saying that they're negative, right? Because as long as you're not harming others, you get to express your anger. So to say, I feel angry. I was talking to a black or mixed kiddo the other day, and she said something like, my sister does something and it makes me feel mad. And I know and she caught herself. And I said, it sounds like you were about to say stupid. And then you stopped yourself. Can you tell me why you thought that was stupid? And so we had a conversation about, why did you think that your sister doing something to like violate your boundaries, and in a way that's like annoying little sister stuff, right? Not in a way that's like hotlineable. But just we had a conversation about, why did you think that that was stupid? Um, and we were able to process that. So yeah. So some Black parenting phrases that are starting to make their way out, right? And not all, again, all of the things that I share, Black people are not monolithic. Not all Black families use these. So as you're talking amongst your Black friends, don't say don't say to. I learned in this training today that these are phrases that Black people use, right? Some Black people still use these phrases. Some people of other races use these phrases, but these are not all monolithic, and these are just toxic phrases that may be said amongst people. All right, so stop all the crying. I'll give you something to cry about. What happens in this house stays in this house. I'm not one of your little friends. This could be debatable, right? Because I'm not one of your little friends, right? I will knock you into the middle of next week. I brought you in this world. I'll take you out. You're too blessed to be stressed. You're just a kid, right? Keep playing with me. You're depressed some dishes. Now, see, I felt like I've heard a lot of people say this one. I've never heard that one growing up. Get my belt. You're just like your mom, dad, etc. And sometimes people say this and they don't necessarily mean it in a negative way, but depending on people's reactions to that, right? Um, it could be toxic for that person, right? So some things to think about. Non-Black parenting. So thinking of transracial adoption. So adopting a Black kid and care or caretaking a Black kid. So you work in a school, you take care of a kid in any capacity that's a Black kid. Minimizing, so passivity, lack of awareness, just kind of like, honey, I don't think that when Johnny called you a monkey that he meant it. And were you guys playing an animal game? Right? Universality in the child struggle. So we all just happen to do XYZ, right? Talking rather than listening, speaking for rather than creating a space. I saw a lot of this during 2020 in the racial protests. Attempting to explain the Black kids' words rather than allowing them to use their own language. I think of this as white splitting, right? So this idea that I think what you're trying to say is, no, what I said is, I'm upset by this, right? So these are some things to think about as you're having conversations, whatever capacity you work in, or if you have a child that is Black. Um, are you doing these things that is causing harm to Black children? To not be responsible for others' behavior, actions, feelings, or problems. So as a Black kid, there are unwritten rules to being Black. We know what they are. Never leave the house without an ID. Don't touch nothing, look at nothing, ask for nothing. Don't be overly compliant with cops, even if they're in the wrong. You can, ask questions later. Avoid doing the dumb stuff other kids their age do. Your white friends can do that. You cannot. Sorry, they're going to snatch you out of the crowd. Um, and that's the sad reality, that other groups of children, particularly white kids, get to make mistakes. Society has shown us in various different avenues and things. I mean, I've been on social media just like looking at cute animals, and I'm just surprised by the number of times I see people like advocating for animals. Like an animal will bite a kid, and it's like, don't put the dog down. And I'll see somebody like overly compliant with the police, and it's like, but they dropped their pencil, and God forbid they made a mistake when they were in middle school. If you go back to my middle school records, it's a wrap. Because I will tell you, the reform therapist that you see in front of you is not the person I was. So can we all just say on record, if anything happens to me, yeah, don't look at my middle school records. So yeah, but in all seriousness, we definitely hold Black kids to an impossible standard, not even a high standard. And sometimes that the reality for Black parents is they have to have those conversations. And I remember talking to a parent of a white student who said something racist to another student, and it was an elementary kiddo, and she said, I feel sad that I have to talk to my kiddo about racism at his age. And I had two thoughts at that point. I could go the coddle route and kind of, oh, that's so sad. And then I thought, that's not doing anybody any justice. And I said, do you know what age Black parents have to talk to their kids? It's pretty young. So we just have to be aware that, this idea of the world has shown us that we have to instill Black dignity, but also the reality of the situation, because the world doesn't show Black kids a lot of grace. And, we want to not alarm them, but at the same time, make sure that they are being safe. And we're going to talk about what that looks like a little bit later, too. To be uniquely myself. This one goes along with following one's own standards and values. So when Black kids are struggling and have mental health or neurodivergence, support is needed. So we know that psychology has a dark history, education has a dark history, with misdiagnosing kids with intellectual disability or behavioral disorders. I still see this. Um, White kids are constantly seen as having mental health issues, even in instances where it's clearly, misused, or overly used, I will say, or inappropriately used, I should say. And one race is left with all the discomfort, and one race is left to never feel discomfort. So you see this even when it comes to laws around teaching certain topics on history, right? We don't want certain groups of kids to feel uncomfortable, right? But then when it comes to being in a classroom where, kids are left to feel uncomfortable, we leave it to Black kids being subject to feeling uncomfortable, right? So we think about even this idea of teaching slavery, for example. It's like there's constantly issues with Black kids left to be feeling uncomfortable because of the way in which we teach slavery. So, it's something to think about that, but also going back to the idea of the history of psychology and education. One of the things that was floating around my community, and when I say my community, I mean particularly my kind of microcosm of the Black community that I grew up in. So I can't say that this is true for all of the Black community, but with this idea that people were afraid to put their kids in special education because it was like, don't put your kids in special education. You know that the school district gets paid for that, right? So every time a kid goes into special education, it was like, they're just kind of checking them off the list so they can, collect a paycheck, right? And so then you get older and you learn that that's not how the system works. It's extremely hard for a kiddo to get into special education, but that there are dollars allocated to special education, right? And at the end of the year, that money has to be spent. And then you think about in certain school district, money isn't necessarily handled correctly. So while the fear is not necessarily, it's misguided, I could see how, it's kind of like playing telephone, where one thing that is, if somebody has actually a bad experience, how that gets passed along and it becomes kind of this urban legend slash telephone myth. right? So it's important for people to be informed about what is actually happening. Does your child have an actual need for special education? What is their diagnosis? Do they have an intellectual disability? And for a lot of parents, I become the liaison and I say, okay, first off, when we're talking about especially mental health, because that's my focus, right, more so than intellectual disability, um, Black kids tend to be overly diagnosed with conduct disorders. So the first thing I say, I mean, I have this battle even now with the parent of a mixed kid. So I said, you know, based on their diagnosis, um, the person who diagnosed them said that we need to make sure we are treating their ADHD with medication and therapy before we consider a conduct disorder. That's what the diagnosis said. The parent is pushing conduct disorder because the person mentioned that. And based on them ex- exhibiting behavior that looks like behavior of one of their other kiddos, they say, yes, this person definitely has this conduct disorder. And I said, no, 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 no. Even if that's true, based on the diagnosis and the paperwork, we need to treat one before we even look at the other. I'm not, you know, disregarding your concerns, but can we control for one before we even look at the other? Because what we don't want to do is give them a label and that follows them and it's not true because we haven't properly treated their first diagnosis. And so we need to be very careful. Now, if they have that diagnosis, yes, let's treat both of them, but we just need to be careful. So let me look at the chat. Yes, Raytown School District did that to my daughter. Raytown, I can definitely, unfortunately, the struggles and misunderstanding of how differently Black people are treated continues. The world doesn't show Black people grace. Yes, truth, but hard conversations. Those are definitely all common Black families. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Okay. So moving on, to feel scared and say, I'm afraid. This is a big one. For kids, saying they feel scared may look like acting out. So I always say to parents, all behavior is communication. I feel like I stole that from my clinical supervisor. I feel like that wasn't original. So I'll give my clinical supervisor credit for that. Yes, but all behavior is communication, right? So they're not going to sit down and say, I feel scared. They're going to act those things out. So is the child acting out due to developmentally appropriate behaviors, overwhelming emotions, racial trauma, or all of the above? I've heard of a lot of different kids just calling out racist behavior now, because what is happening now as parents are not holding their kids accountable for racist behavior, what I see and hear is Black parents or parents of Black kiddos stepping up and saying, we're going to call out the racist behavior. And you can let this person know that their behavior is racist. So kids are going to school and saying, that's not okay, that's racist. But you know who's getting disciplined? If you could just guess. Do you think the white kid is getting disciplined? No, it's the Black kid. So instead of chastising the white kids for racist behavior, notice I did not say being racist, the racist behavior, they are chastising the Black kids for calling out the racist behavior. So this looks like, no, fill in the blank. Kenneth, don't say that, right? That's not okay. What this is just a misunderstanding. Let's all be friends, because here in this school, everybody's friends. And I have to go and not necessarily my school, because I won't do those. But in other schools, I've heard this type of thing. So, you know, and then I have flat out told kids in general, even when it comes to things like the whole let's all be friends, I'm not friends with everybody, even my coworkers. So you don't have to be friends with everybody. All right. We just play here, right? You do have to be kind to everybody, right? But we don't all have to be friends. All right. So imagine going to school through technology and social media overload, school shootings, and COVID. Now imagine how hard it would be to see people who look like you repeatedly murdered on television. Now imagine you are a child and lack the cognition and coping skills to process it. I think we talk a lot about what the pandemic did to kids' mental health, academically, social skills, but do we realize that Black kids survived 2 pandemics and they lack the cognition to be able to process that? And then we kind of just send them back to school. And what we're seeing, I've done a presentation before on human development in the post-COVID era. I talked a lot about, how the pandemic, we're still going to see the side effects of and the long-term effects of COVID for years and years to come. That wasn't just like, oh, that's over, right? I talk a lot about grief and how grief is not just the grief of physical death, right? In my work with clients of all different presenting issues, but especially trauma, right? And we all went through a collective trauma, but we forget that Black kids were seeing people repeatedly murdered, and we didn't check on them. And then we sent them back to school, and we said, okay, they went through 2 pandemics. So, in the book, The Body Keeps the Score, there's this idea of developmental trauma, right? Which is different from PTSD, in which, you know, you think about someone having PTSD as an adult, which you can have PTSD as a child, right? But developmentally, trauma across the lifespan, when you don't have the cognition to process what is happening developmentally, that is hard, right? So it isn't just, and this is where I have to make the distinction in which we can't just say it's a universality, right? Of oh, when people say things like, oh, it's hard when your name is mispronounced or things like that. Or it's hard when someone does something insensitive like touch your hair. It's not just that, right? That universality says that these things are happening to all of us. But trauma-informed care says there's a difference in you seeing people who are murdered, who look like you're mistreated throughout the school, you're mistreated throughout society, and then someone mispronounces your name, in addition to all of the historical events that happened to you. It's not just you have a difficult name. All right, so disenfranchised grief. You know, Black kids need their own personal space and time. So this from WebMD, disenfranchised grief is when your grieving doesn't fit in with your larger society's attitude about dealing with death and loss. So as we said, children, Black children have survived 2 pandemics, and we've as a society have neglected that larger in a larger scope, right? So up until 2020, when I say white people discover racism, because in 2020, all my white friends started texting me, did you know that, all these facts that were like, oh, wow, dude, this is so cool. I've never known this about Black people and the suffering, right? Oh, wow. And of course, I've known these things, right? So it's profound for you to explore these things. But so after 2020, um, even after 2020, Black people are hurting and it goes highly unnoticed, right? White people discovered racism in 2020, and then it was like, let's do all these book studies, things like this to make ourselves feel better, pat ourselves on the back, do a DEI, and wrap it up in 2021. And now we've just kind of left it at that, right? But we are consistently suffering with racial battle fatigue, right? So this idea, this was a term that was coined in 2008 by theorist William Smith. So it was basically used to describe the experiences of African American men, but then it was changed to people of color in the United States. And it's the cumulative result of a natural race-related stress response to distressing mental and emotional conditions. These conditions emerge from constantly facing racially dismissive, demeaning, insensitive, and or hostile racial environments and individuals. So yeah, it's Austin Channing Brown, which I have to give her credit for this idea of Black dignity. She wrote a book called I'm Still Here, which will be on my resources slide, she goes as far to say white people are exhausting, right? So this idea that it's racial battle fatigue, right? It's exhausting to constantly have to deal with all of these concepts, right? And sometimes you just need to have your own need for personal space and time, right? Being in a situation where white people are repeatedly reinforced. I'll tell you one brief situation in which I was in grad school, and I remember just feeling like, I mean, we're in the pandemic, everything is happening, life is happening. My school doesn't really make an effort to really check on Black students. I'll leave it at that. But I remember sitting in class one day, and one of my teachers positively reinforced one of my white classmates 10 times within 5 minutes. The same white person, 10 times within 5 minutes. And it's like, even for subpar things, right? And so even when we have great ideas, we're looked over. So I've learned in certain situations when I worked, in more group settings, that if I could pass my ideas off to a white person, particularly a white female, those ideas would get a lot more credit, right? If I just said it, it was like, nah, I don't know if that will really work. But if I said the same thing to a white girl to pass on, it was like, wow, this is brilliant. So I just did it to just like prove a point. Like, maybe it's just me and it's really not a great idea. And I can accept that, right? Like, okay, this is mediocre, basic, this won't work. But then I would pass it on and it's like, oh, wow, I've never thought of that, right? So working hard for twice the amount of credit. So, what I've seen at the elementary and just K through 12 level is this idea of withholding praise and only noticing the bad. The idea that we just don't acknowledge Black kids for when they are behaving and doing what they're supposed to, because in our eyes, it's like, you don't get rewarded for doing what you do. But then we have, whole actual initiatives like PBIS and other things that actually do reward you for doing what you're supposed to do. And then we only notice when they're doing bad. So remember when I said that all behavior is communication? So a kid goes, I'm going to either do perfectionist, right? Or I'm going to go extreme above and beyond. And then I probably still won't be noticed, but at least, I'll fly under the radar. Or I will become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Oh, you think I'm bad? I will show you bad, right? So, and sometimes the perfectionists, they just have a day where it's like, you know what, I can't take this anymore. You're noticing every kid around me for, sharpening their pencil correctly. And I'm not even being noticed for like all the things I do. So when I have a rough day, and then you notice me, right? You're usually doing what you need to do. Why is today any different? Why are you acting out, right? You're usually the kid I can count on. I put everything on your back, right? And this is how we train kids to be little perfectionists, right? So it's important that we don't do that. To be playful and frivolous. Black kids have faced so many expectations, even from Black caregivers and teachers. They must grow up fast and shoulder much responsibility. Let Black kids play. Let them play. Okay. To make friends and be comfortable around people. So Black kids have the right to be comfortable and safe around people. Before you dismiss something as not a big deal, put yourself in the Black kids' shoes. Often Black kids are chastised or ignored when confronting racism against us. So I've kind of talked about that. To change and grow. So as Black kids approach adolescence and even prior, they are adultified. So boys are seen as threats. I just had to tell someone about this. They were telling a story and they said, Black man. And I had to stop them and say, Black kid, they are not a Black man. And then they went, instead of accepting the answer, they said, that's what they will become. And I thought to myself, by that definition, 12-year-olds should have driver's license. I should get a senior discount at Denny's, right? By that definition, everybody should be able to do everything right now. That's the problem with adultifying. We cannot adultify kids. Boys are not men, okay? Girls are girls. And it's important, even as they hit puberty, that we do not adultify them, right? Because if we adultify them, what happens when a cop sees them? That's the first thing they go, well, I thought he was a teenager. Actually, he's only 7. Well, I thought he was an adult. Actually, he's only 12. And then we have the problem with, the sexualization because we've adultified. Well, she looked fast. She didn't look like a 15-year-old girl. I thought she was way older. Anybody who knows and who's talked to kids knows a kid talks like a kid. Right. So, and it's not on the kid to not adultify. It's on the adult to not adultify. Because kids are going to kid and they're going to always try to be something they're not. But most of the time, they're not even trying. It's just they're being a kid. So it's up to us to say, no, even if they look older, they still act like a child. So I'm just, when in doubt, I'm going to assume to be treated with dignity and respect. So presentation matters because it has roots in slavery. Think about in the Colin Black and White series, he does a great job of just talking about presentation and how the bigger you are, the more in terms of slavery, the presentation of your Black body mattered. So that's why people are like, why would you have Jordans on instead of putting food in your refrigerator? We were culturally conditioned to care about our presentation. And now people have a problem with that. And me personally, we're not all monolithic either, right? So, but presentation still matters, right? Clothing and hair. So if you are a parent of a Black kiddo, let's say you're a transracial adoptive parent, please learn how to do their hair or have it done because it matters to them. And I just have to say this, one of the things I teach is petting is for animals. I do not let kids touch my hair. I had a client come in and they were a Black kid and they were transracial adoptee. And at first it was like, your hair looks weird. Can I touch it? No, petting is for animals. And their mom said, that's what the white kids want to do with her at her school. And I say, you have the right to tell people to keep their hands to themselves. They don't get to pet you either. Right. So we're still having these conversations in 2023. Immerse yourself in Black culture. Make sure they are involved in groups with kids that look like them especially if they're in predominantly white spaces. Okay, to be happy. Black kids have the right to be happy. All right, so foster dignity and body image, expressing emotions, strengths and recognition, circle of support, their future. All right. So there's lots of strengths in Black culture. We have collectivism, hard work ethic, self-advocacy, which can be weaponized. I feel like when it's all self-advocacy, that's not good either. We shouldn't be teaching people just to be their own advocates. We should also be helping them along the way, but we shouldn't be silencing Black voices either. Joy, and there's also so many other food for thought. So Black kids have seen enough death, discipline, disaster, and love is not enough. So they need strength-based therapeutic support. So humility. I'm going to fly through these because I know we're going to go on to kind of Q&A. So just a couple of ones. Examine your own.
You're good. You got 10 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
You're good.
But that's Q&A, right?
You're good. You're good. We can leave a few more minutes for Q&A, but
perfect.
You're good. Keep going.
Perfect. Awesome. Okay. Examine your own racial identity. Check yourself first, your racial bias and microaggressions. Check your privilege. Check your motive, your unmet needs and unhealed trauma. Little Black kids become adults. By this, I mean They're going to grow up to be adults. So how you treat them as children matters. Check your friends and family, secondly. Learn and unlearn about Black children. Don't assume that you know what it's like to be a Black child now, just even if you were a Black child once. By that, I mean, if you are Black, you know what it's like to be a Black child because you were once a Black child, but you don't know what it's like to be a Black child now, right? So again, it's about learning and unlearning. Recognize your privilege, check your privilege, and use your privilege. Whether you are Black, white, or another race, advocating for Black kids is not about you, especially if you are not Black, right? I see this a lot where it's like this, it becomes like, I say it's kind of like, we used to say, I have a Black friend, so I can't be racist. Now it's, I have a Black child, so I can't be racist. Or so it's not about you. And for the record, we can still be racist even if we have a Black child, right? So when you want to check out of showing up for Black kids and people, don't. It's very privileged to be able to say, okay, we did that in 2020 and 2021. We explored racism, we discovered racism, and now it's over. It's easy to check out and be like, that was done. It's hard to step in and say, I'm going to, it's hard, but I don't get to take off my Black skin and decide that, don't sink into apathy, right? And don't think you know better than someone with lived experience. I mean, I see this all the time where even the most woke people want to come and kind of, don't say slaves, say enslaved people. And it's like, I'm so glad you learned that. But that's not all we're talking about, right? So it's important. All right, so here's just this is for all the counselors in the room. Say whoop whoop, give me a thumbs up, hit the emojis. All right, all the people, even if you work with people of any capacity, especially kids, right? Thank you, thank you. This is for you. This slide is for you. All right. Common complaints that I've done a lot of phone consultations and even just like sitting with Black clients, and I hear these from clients. So you can consider this the bonus slide for you. That things that really just annoy Black people that you do as a white therapist or white person, social worker, you lack empathy. You're too quick to apply universality. This means we're all in this together. We're not. Okay, we just talked about all the ways we are not. You lack insight into Black culture. Okay. I am excited when I can talk to my therapist and she's like, oh, I like your box braids. And I'm like, girl, you know what box braids are? Things like that really get me excited. Okay. You're defensive, right? Your stances are too no. You should have basic human stances, right? But you don't need to go into all your stances because it's not about you in the therapeutic room. You're invalidating. You ask stupid questions. You want clients to educate you, okay? You don't study on your own from Black people. Like you rely too much on Brene Brown, okay, and Robin DiAngelo because it's comfortable and easy, all right? And you make it about yourself. So complain, blame, explain. Complain, you complain about. Basically, I've created this model where I say complain is about, you complain about other people's racism, right? You blame people for what happened to them, right? Are you sure you didn't like do something that caused him to feel that way? And then you try to explain the racism away, right? So you need to make sure if you're working with Black people, or if you ever want to see a Black person in your therapeutic group, or if you want them to come back, you stop doing these things immediately. All right. Yeah. A few other quick tips. Ask, don't assume. Empathize, don't pathologize. Try to connect with the Black kid's feeling of disempowerment before trying to correct. Let the Black kid be. Don't ignore the painful events happening in the world and how it affects Black kids. So what this looks like, what I started doing, especially around any sort of events for kids, is like big events, right? And it could be anything from like school shootings, rather than just asking like, hey, have you heard about the latest school shooting? Because that's traumatizing, right? What I saw people do, even at my school as a college student, which was very harmful, and it was more about making it about them and their need to be woke. Let me just talk about the most like terrifying thing that happened to a Black person today and give all the details in class. So that's just harmful, right? And again, it made it more about the person and like, wow, I know I'm woke. I just started asking, is there anything happening in the news that is upsetting to you or overwhelming to you? And then kids could kind of go, no. Or they could go, yeah. I mean, I had a kid talk about like the Chinese spy balloon one time or whatever spy balloon. So they can kind of give me a yeah or nay. And that way I'm not like, if they haven't heard about it, I'm not traumatizing them. And and if they have and they want to talk about it, I'm leaving it open ended enough, right? So that is a good way that if you want to, give them an open invitation to say like I'm here if you need to talk about it, right? Um, and then even if they have heard about it, it still gives them an invitation like I'm here if you want to talk about it, but if you don't, we don't have to. Understand that some Black and poor families are still in survival, so don't judge. And that's, I make the distinction between Black and poor because sometimes we link the two together and we say Black people this, and we assume that because someone is Black, they're poor, or we look at poverty and as if that's synonymous with Black. Parents, give your Black kid a few Black mental health days a year. That's just my recommendation. And here's some resources. Some of these are kid specific, but a lot of these are just allowing yourself to be immersed in what to do. So I will stop share and kind of look at the chat and feel free to ask questions.
So we have a few minutes left. First of all, thank you, Tamicka. That was so eye-opening and such an important conversation. And I think we need to continue to have conversations around this topic of and not just having the conversation, but the doing. So thank you. Thank you for giving ideas and some things that we can actually do. So with that, we do have a few minutes for questions. I will also put the certificate of attendance into the chat now, but now is our time to ask questions. We try to make all mental health KC webinars judgment free. We want this to be a time to be able to ask questions and especially around, instilling Black dignity. This is the time to ask some questions. So we did have 66 people in the room. So please ask. You can ask in the chat or you can ask in the Q&A.
I saw someone ask earlier if I could make the slides available. Is that something if I sent it to you, you could send out? Thank you. Thank you.
So some people want to know if you can do more presentations like this.
Of course. I'm always down to talk about. I get so passionate and excited.
Okay, any questions? So there is one question. So one person's interested in how white and Black communities define different words like white supremacy.
Ooh, That would be a whole presentation. I would be interested in too. Um, it would be hard to say. Um, I think that sometimes people in the white community shy away from the idea of white supremacy because it sounds like we meaning people who are pro fighting white supremacy, equated with racism. And it's so much more broad than that. If you look at what white supremacy is, it's actually um, the oppression of many different types of things, right? So you think about like Nazi Germany and how the movement was to basically extinguish anybody who was different, like poor people, gay people, anybody who was different. So white supremacy, the umbrella is so much more larger than just race. It's actually, I mean, the eugenics movement, even um, in America, was to eradicate um, people who were different, right? So I actually broaden my view to include all of that, and I think people who really do anti-racism understand that. Yeah, well, to go back to my previous point, anti-racism is that. So it is basically synonymous in that we don't just look at race, right? We look at and consider ableism and all of the ways in which we oppress people. And it's not just about black and white, but I think that people who hear the word go, "Oh, are you calling me a racist because I have a black friend or I have a this or that?" And it's like, no, but are you also, do you actively fight against oppression in various different forms? And more so than even how black and white people define it, how do people across the spectrum define white supremacy? There's so many ways in which people don't understand what white supremacy is. It's the idea of being supreme. And the closer you are to being straight, cisgender, blonde hair, blue eyed, the intelligent, right, in the definition, um, the closer you are to being the supreme of what we value as a society. And so that's what white supremacy is. And anything that is other or different from that, we say is no good, unworthy. If you're fat, you have mental health issues, all of these things, you're unworthy. So
Thank you. We have now 3 more questions. People popped in questions really quick. So first one, as a white counselor, as a white counselor, how can we support our clients experiencing racism at school?
mhm. The first thing is, listen, I think the biggest thing, that I've seen is in the shift in psychology is we went from let's be completely racist in movement, and then we shifted into now we have to be like, let's take so much action, right? And sometimes what someone is looking for is balance, right? And that I don't want you to like call up my school and like make it to where it's going to create more tension and problems. The first thing is listening to what they're actually wanting you to do in session. So maybe it is actual support and lowering your defensiveness in session and just be aware of your own biases in session. Which sounds like, oh, I'm not really doing anything. But you would be surprised how much having someone actually listen to the harm that has been done can just be the number one starting place. And then from there, they can actually give you good feedback on what they want you to do in particular. Because it's hard to say, like, do they want you to take action and support them? But the taking action is listening and lowering your defenses.
Thank you. Okay, next question. And really quick, I did want to let you guys know, I just found out that the certificate is misspelled. And so I apologize. Tamika, actually, your name is misspelled. I didn't know that. But the A at the end, I think, is missing what I just heard. So I apologize. We will get that fixed. So I apologize for that. Okay, so the next question. As an advocate for kiddos in foster care, any advice for helping kids trust you when they've been told not to trust white people?
Ooh. So kids can tell when you're being fake. I know that sounds like, so if you're coming in there and your energy says, I want you to trust me so bad, it's going to give off. It took me, this kiddo wasn't even in foster care, but for the sake of understanding, a kid I was working with, it took 6 months, and they were a white kid just in working. It took us 6 months to even build a rapport, to do any work, but me just being patient and being there is what it took. So you're going to have to show over a period of time and commit to yourself that no matter how long it takes, I'm going to be there, and not go in with like, I'm going to wait so many months and then I'm going to give up, or I'm going to go and try everything for them to like me, right? It's going to, because what they've shown in general is that, you know, people are untrustworthy, especially white people, right? So you've got to give it a long amount of time, no matter how long it takes, and just be consistent.
Okay, two more questions. What resources, avenues would you recommend for non-POC looking to gain education and insight on Black culture?
What resources?
What resources?
Yeah. So I think the resources at the end of my presentation are a great place to start, because they're actually a combination of books. Some of them are like the Netflix series, some of them are, I want to say, PDFs. So they'll be a great place to start. Did I answer the question? Yeah.
Yep. Okay, last question. So based on your experience living in Chicago with gentrification, what advice would you give to people experiencing this in Kansas City?
Ooh, if by experiencing this you mean like, first, get out there and vote. Get out there and vote. Definitely talk to your local, I don't live in Kansas City, but talk to your local governing officials, but definitely be very aware of what's happening, because like I said, it's parallel. So get out there and vote, talk to your people, push back against like higher property taxes, and you know, talk to the housing authority people and governing officials, because yeah, it's important.
Okay, with that, I know we are 7 minutes over, but um, thank you, Tamicka, for staying on.
Of
And
course.
thank you actually to the over 50 participants that stayed on as well. So thank you all so much. I want to appreciate everybody's time today, the questions, Tamicka, for sharing your expertise and knowledge and experience. So thank you. And this is our last webinar of 2023. I want to thank you all so much for being here. We wanted to end with Tamicka. So
Best for last? Was I the
yeah,
best?
yes, important topic that we end with. So thank you all. And now that everybody has come, you are now on our distribution list. So keep an eye out for webinars for 2024, along with a save the date for the Mental Health KC conference. We will be having more of these kind of topics at the conference. Tamicka presented last year. So, and I know she and I were already talking about her presenting again this year. So come join us for the Mental Health KC conference. This said May 23rd and 24th. And we hope to see you all soon. So have a wonderful day, wonderful rest of the year. And thank you for your participation.
Bye, friends.
Bye.
Make it a great day.